How you guys doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here on Tuesday, January 21st, here to talk some more football with you guys, more stuff around the NFL, talking a little bit more of the games we saw over the weekend, some topics related to that, but also just some things looking forward and, just topics in general around the NFL. Some things like Ben Johnson. We didn't get too much of a chance to talk about him yesterday because of the recentness of the news. So we're going to get into it more today, as well as looking at the divisional round, giving some overreactions to what we saw from those games in relation to the winners. We're going to talk about Jayden Daniels. Is he having the best rookie season of NFL history? All of those things and more coming up on today's show, so make sure to stick around. And before we get started, though, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments or just any opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to let us know what you're thinking, your thoughts, your insight, and input into anything. Always adds a lot to these live shows just to give us a different perspective and maybe think about something that we didn't originally think of when talking about these segments. So if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. I'm able to see it, read it out loud, and get your guys' thoughts on anything related to the topic on hand. So let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and get involved with the show. So with that being said, the biggest thing to talk about, just to start off the show, is obviously the news related to Ben Johnson, now the head coach of the Chicago Bears. We ended yesterday's show by briefly mentioning it and just giving our pretty new thoughts on it, with the whole idea that the Bears were still finalizing this deal to make Ben Johnson their new head coach. And I don't know if I missed the official announcement, but it seems pretty set in stone now, especially today with, I don't know if you guys saw it on social media, how the Bears posted a video of Ben Johnson there at Hallis Hall, probably going over things with Ryan Poles, the whole organization basically. He had his family there, and it was a pretty cool moment just because he was there in front of everybody, the staff, and just kind of giving like a brief statement there to everybody at Hallis Hall, which was pretty cool to see the reception and everything like that. So if that's not pretty much set in stone, then I don't know what is. But yeah, Johnson's now in charge of the Chicago Bears. That is the next chapter that will be entering with the Chicago Bears. And not only this, but it's already moving pretty quickly in regards to who could be joining Ben Johnson here as part of his coaching staff. It's been moving pretty quickly already because ESPN has already posted some things regarding their defensive coordinator position and special teams coordinator as well, with ESPN saying that the Saints' former head coach this past season, Dennis Allen, if you guys remember, also was fired about halfway through the season. He is said to be the favorite right now to join the Bears as the defensive coordinator. As of right now, he's the leading candidate to take up that spot. But again, those are just reports coming out. And also, in regards to the Saints, after Dennis Allen was fired, their special teams coordinator, Darren Rizzi, was promoted to interim head coach. And now that the Saints are looking for a full-time head coach now, not an interim head coach, Darren Rizzi is also being linked to the Chicago Bears as being their special teams coordinator as well. But unlike Dennis Allen, Darren Rizzi also has other head coaching opportunities or just other interviews out there with other franchises. So that one might take a little bit longer, but there's already starting to be some names, some candidates out there to potentially join Ben Johnson on his staff. So things are moving pretty quickly, and the assistant coaches are important. Those are fundamental to building not only the team, the atmosphere and everything, but really getting your message out across to everybody. But it's not as important as, the quarterback and Caleb Williams. And really, owning the fact that his development is the biggest thing that is on the Chicago Bears' mind above anything else, I think, at least for this season, right? Usually teams go into the season thinking about, how can they improve, what could be their ceiling eventually, what and how far they could get in the season and things like that. How are they going to get better over the course of the season? But I think with the Chicago Bears first is really getting this huge investment in Caleb Williams, really under their tutelage, under their teachings, and really get him to show why he was worthy of that number one overall pick. Because I think he's very talented. I think he's got endless amounts of abilities and things like that. But, the first year didn't go as planned at all. They drafted him number one overall. And not only has he had 3 offensive coordinators, 2 head coaches already in a pretty up and down year for Caleb Williams, but they drafted him number one overall, and the guy right behind them that was drafted is currently playing in the NFC Championship game. So that, by comparison, these 2 guys are always going to be linked, as well as all the other quarterbacks. But really, Caleb and Jayden are always going to be linked just because the Bears had the opportunity to take either one of them. And you want to make sure that this investment was the right decision. And I still think it can be, but that's why this process now is so important for Ben Johnson and developing Caleb Williams, because they need to put an end to this pretty bad reputation that the Bears have going about rookie quarterbacks not succeeding there and just never having a true franchise guy. And I think Caleb, by far, is the closest thing they've ever had to that, so they can't mess up this opportunity and be in a situation like the Jaguars are right now with Trevor Lawrence, like the Jets were with all their quarterbacks as well. The Bears are included in that group, which is not something you want to be a part of. So I think they have a great opportunity here, still with a very good, built-up roster with DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, who they drafted, Cole Kmet, if they bring back Keenan Allen, and their defense is still very, very good. So the biggest thing for me was that they just needed some sort of direction and guidance, really, because they have all the pieces, but everyone's not really, moving to the beat of the same drum, right, if that makes sense. So with that all being said, Caleb also, in this decision, he really wasn't shy about letting his feelings be known about his admiration for Ben Johnson. He appeared on the St. Brown Brothers podcast recently, and they asked him about him, and he really didn't shy away too much from it. He still kept it pretty biased, but you could tell that he wanted Ben Johnson, and I'm sure he's elated that Ben Johnson and now him can build this relationship going forward. And I really like the hire also because I think Ben Johnson is a guy that can really improve the team just on his own ability and his ability and knack for schemes, formations, and really just calling a team and giving them the blueprint to operating at a very high level. Whereas, other coaches, other, assistant coaches or just personnel out there might, benefit from a very talented team. And more often than not, it's the players, it's having a veteran quarterback, it's having, great receivers, great offensive line already there. And, the head coach doesn't really give or isn't really given too much credit. So I think Ben Johnson really going into this opportunity now, we're going to see what he could bring to the table right off the bat, because he's going to want to shape this offense into what he wants it to look like, not necessarily just his players winning games or doing well just on their own merit. He's there to give them direction and really give them an identity, and I think we're going to see it sooner rather than later. And while it's all exciting and everything like that, it's not to say that they don't desperately need upgrades in a lot of different spots to get to eventually where we think this could go. And I think offensive line is definitely the biggest one they could upgrade, because Caleb was the most sacked quarterback in the NFL, and there's some pretty intriguing free agents out there like Trey Smith or Kevin Seitler from the Lions as well, and some other offensive linemen are escaping my mind. But there are some good candidates out there for the Bears to make that sort of upgrade. And you could also get another wide receiver if you feel fit, if Keenan Allen doesn't come back, some other guys maybe on a cheaper deal if that works out for them. But there's a couple spots where they definitely can improve, and you have the 10th overall selection in the draft as well. So overall, I expect other with the news of Ben Johnson and it coming so quickly, and how I mentioned that already other guys are being linked to joining him in Chicago, I think how this affects everything else kind of in like a macro sort of perspective is that now with one domino falling, arguably the biggest domino falling, I think we're going to start seeing the head coaching candidates and hires go back to back to back pretty quickly. There's already news around the Jets and Aaron Glenn potentially coming to an agreement. Nothing official yet, but it seems like they're very close. A couple other teams are having second interviews, like Robert Saleh is having a couple with the Raiders and the Jaguars. The Saints are having an interview with Mike McCarthy and other candidates as well. The Raiders are also being linked to Pete Carroll. So with the biggest guy already being taken off the market, you can see how everyone's going to start rushing to getting guys a lot quicker, like I mentioned. So, Dallas is also another one. So keep an eye out on that, or we'll surely talk about that on the upcoming shows once those become official. But the first and biggest name is now off the board. Ben Johnson is going to be the Chicago Bears head coach starting in 2025 and into the foreseeable future. Very exciting times in Chicago with that hire. And now with that being said, though, we're going to go back a little bit and start talking some more about the playoffs. And not so much about the games and really the specific teams, but just some overarching thoughts, some takeaways from the overall weekend that we had. Starting off with the ball security, the time of possession, and just really having control and managing the games really being prevalent in this postseason. I think that's been one of the main differences that we've seen from the teams that have moved on. So we're going to talk about it. Game managing versus, efficiency and the perfection that we're seeing out there that has really distinguished some of these teams from moving on and being sent home. So we'll touch on that a little bit more when we return after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We're back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk a little bit more about the NFL divisional round and looking forward a little bit, because the irony in the NFL, I think that we are starting to see, is that defenses are being asked, like the general thought is that defenses are being asked to play safer and not be as violent, with more of a sense of carefulness around, the recent seasons and especially this season. We had an incident in the Texans game and the Chiefs game, right, where there was those penalties that a lot of people will classify as soft and that they're protecting the quarterback too much, especially because it had to do with Patrick Mahomes. So there is that aspect of it, right? But I think it's ironic here, before I get to it, is that Anthony Manzano said, I understand they're friends, but is this what hurts certain coaches? They're more reward about pleasing their friends instead of doing what's right for the team. Are you referencing Ben Johnson in this? I think that's what I know what you're referencing. Yeah, McDaniels and the Patriots. I saw that before I came on here. Yeah, I think that's what my McDaniels needs to do with the Dolphins. So I understand he's friends with Frank Smith because they were in San Francisco together. I don't think I saw that in regards to the Dolphins, right? That any head coaching news that they made, well, not head coaching, it's just coaching in general. But he needs to realize that I'm doing this is hurting the Dolphins, sticking with Brent out of loyalties, banging down down our offense. Let me give it a quick check here, because I am actually unaware of the news around any Dolphins, coaching news. So I will check in just a second. But I mean, I haven't heard anything regarding that. So I can't give a good answer to it just because I am unaware of any of the coaching moves that the Dolphins have made in regards to them and any news regarding the Dolphins so far, actually. So if I do see something, I will be more than glad to answer it. But here's another comment. Know what I'm saying as a fan. I think he needs to move on from Frank Smith. I understand his attachment to him because you're friends, because they started together in San Francisco. I'm not saying there's rumors. What I'm saying is I wish he evolves coach and realizes that keeping his friends is hurting the team. I mean, that's one of the biggest things, in general, with the coaches and things like that. Especially, I guess I'll relate it to my experience with the Steelers and how they're overly loyal and how it could just get frustrating when it feels like the end goal isn't about winning games and you're not basing it off of the performance. Because if you're basing it off of the performance, it feels pretty clear that you should move on. But I do get that sense of, it feels like teams are overly loyal or some coaches are overly loyal with some other members of the staff. And it feels like it's holding the entire team back. So that part is extremely frustrating, I'm sure. And also I think a lot of teams just don't like change at some point, right? They want to keep it stable and have some sort of sense of, maintaining the same sort of voice in there. So that I can kind of understand, but really, in the end, I do also see your point in how the over loyalty can be pretty frustrating as well. But, going back to the playoffs here a little bit and the divisional round and things like that, I mentioned how it was ironic how now when you thought with all these changes to the rules and how defenses are playing a bit safer, I guess is the word, when you thought you'd get these high-scoring games of 30 points, 40 points, and things like that more often than not, with all the great quarterbacks that we have now in the NFL and these high-powered offenses as well, right? I think the playoffs have not been about the 300-yard games or multiple touchdowns by quarterbacks, but rather time of possession and just making less mistakes. And I think it's been pretty clear with the last four teams that we have here remaining in the playoffs and how that sentiment is really clear in all these four teams that are still remaining. Because you look at the Commanders, the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Philadelphia Eagles, all of them have not committed a single turnover in the playoffs so far. The first conference championship weekend ever with the teams that have no turnovers in the postseason is this year, right? This is the first time ever that we've gotten to this point, and none of these teams have turned the ball over in so far in the postseason. To give a little bit of context for all these teams, right? It's been 3 weeks since the Commanders last committed a turnover. Their last turnover was in Week 8. The last time the Eagles and the Bills committed a turnover was 5 weeks ago in Week 16, and the Chiefs have not committed a turnover since Week 11. That was 70 days ago that the Chiefs hurt themselves in any sort of way with committing a turnover that set them back. They haven't been able to do that in a long time, like over 2 months now. 2.5 months they haven't been able to do that, which is remarkable for all of these teams. And overall, that's 0 turnovers and 15 takeaways combined for all four of these teams as well, which is another remarkable stat. And the teams that are winning, the turnover battle right now are 7-0 in these playoffs, which is the best record entering the conference title weekend in the last 15 seasons. So with all those stats, that I just kind of threw out there, if that doesn't say that the main idea, the main theme with these playoffs so far has been just the way that you contribute to winning and not so much just getting your own way and hurt yourselves. And I think that was really the biggest point with the Baltimore Ravens, I think most of all, just because I feel like the main conversations I've heard with the Ravens in that game was that they were clearly the better team, but they were also the team that committed 2 turnovers. And although they came back at the end, right, you always feel like that game could have ended differently if you didn't make those 2 turnovers, right? If you just didn't get in your own way. And during the broadcast, they mentioned Myles Garrett saying something like that in relation to the Ravens, how they're their worst own enemy. And Bill Belichick always said something, and people always reference it, and I thought it was such a great quote, right? How he was always saying, you can't start winning until you stop losing. And I think that's what a lot of teams unfortunately deal with in this stage of the playoffs, right? A lot of the times when you're so evenly matched, all it takes is for one team to lose the game rather than both teams that are evenly matched for one team to just clearly dominate them and, one-up them in any portion of the game. When 2 teams are very good, like all of the teams are now in the playoffs, it's hard for you to just play better solely without the other team committing a turnover, right? So that's something we've seen a lot of this season. And also just keeping possession for these last 4 teams has also been a very big point because they all rank top 5 in 4th down conversion rate this postseason as well. They're for the best of keeping drives alive with the play calling, but also the personnel that they have, and just the level of execution that we're seeing from all of these 4 teams, I think is also super remarkable to just watch, right? This is like the pinnacle of playoff football, and I think it's some of the most efficient and just clean football that I've seen from all 4 of these teams up until this point, at least from my recent memory. I can't remember a time where all 4 of these teams obviously have shown this level of execution, just making sure everything is in line, all their T's are crossed, all their I's are dotted, and things like that, right? I can't recall another time where I've seen 4 teams, play to this standard all at the same time. And more so on each of these teams, the Chiefs, just to kind of give another idea of how well they're playing, how well they're managing the game. The last turnover they had was in Week 11, like I mentioned, and ironically, it came against the Buffalo Bills, right, who are still playing. And there's been 280 turnovers since that point in Week 12, and 0 have been by the Kansas City Chiefs, which is outstanding. And then you look at Buffalo, right, they still have not lost the turnover battle at all this year, which is insane to think about, that they've never really put themselves in a position to lose the game on their own basically, right? They haven't put themselves in that position all year. And Josh Allen has a sack, fumble, or interception rate of just 4.2% this year. That's the lowest by any quarterback in a single season since the merger. And it's also ironic because, Josh Allen, the biggest criticism about him has been those turnovers that he used to commit. And now for him to completely go the other way, 180 degrees the other way, is insane. And it's no surprise why the Bills are playing this great, reaching their ceiling when Josh Allen is playing the cleanest football of his career. And then you look at the Eagles, right? Jalen Hurts has cut his turnovers in half from 20 last year to only 10 this year. And he only has 1 in the last 8 games as well. So, yeah, he might not be throwing the ball as much, but he's also not turning it over, and they're still winning games. So that's another reason why, each of these teams is being so successful up until this point. And the last team, obviously the Commanders, they have the best 4th down conversion rate in the entire NFL. They're converting at an 81% clip as of right now, and that's the best since 1991. And they're able to do that because obviously they're not making mistakes to hurt their opportunities to extend drives as well. So with all of that being said, we were very much able to see the difference with these 4 teams and the 4 teams that were unfortunately sent home, right? All the other teams created turnovers for themselves, and they paid the highest price of it, right? And they were sent home in the next round. So it'll be fascinating to see now how none of these teams have committed turnovers, and now that they're going to be playing against each other, what sort of calculated risks are we going to see? How are each of these teams, playing against each other? How are they going to manage, taking those risks, managing the clock, which defense steps up, forces a turnover evidently. And in other words, it's kind of weird just seeing how each team kind of plays more perfect than the other one. And I can't, think of another way to say it, because quite frankly, all four of these teams are playing pretty perfect football, and a synonym to that would be clean. Everybody says clean, they're playing efficient and everything like that, but they're playing pretty perfect football. They'll never admit it, but at least in my opinion, they're playing pretty perfect up until this point. And the fact that Jayden Daniels specifically is in this group just tells me even more that he's one of those QBs, right? Like, he's one of those Josh Allen, Patrick, Joe Burrow, if you will, kind of quarterbacks. And I think what's also interesting about seeing this standard of efficiency spread out through four of these teams now, I think it's really fascinating how it's not just one guy or one team that you have to play perfect against now, because before it was always the Patriots and you have to be perfect, all your details, and the margin of error was so slim against just one team, it felt like. And now it feels like you have maybe like 3, potentially 4 teams that you have to play perfect football against in order for you to win that game, right? Like the Chiefs, the Bills, Joe Burrow, if they get him any help, that's another one. And Lamar Jackson, I guess you could throw in there, and maybe even Jayden Daniels at some point. Again, if that roster gets a little bit better. But you know what I mean? It feels like it's not just one team that you have to, constantly circle at the beginning of each year and say, if we want to play as good as them, we got to be perfect. Now I feel like it's a good group of those teams that you got to play perfect against. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like that's kind of relating back to the conversation we had last week, where all the higher seeds were always winning games, and we had a conversation about whether that was good for the NFL, kind of like we knew already what was going to happen. But because the standard is so high now, when you get one of these quarterbacks and personnel that understand it's not so much about, the quantity of how many points you get, right, and how many points you put up and how fast you do it, but rather the quality and making sure that you're very efficient in any of these games, I think that's where we are starting to see the separation, because these quarterbacks are all very capable of putting up 30-plus points, right? They're all very talented like that, but I think now, especially how these teams are built based on the run, more of a team aspect, not just one bona fide wide receiver, but really incorporating everybody, I think that also is a shift that we're starting to see as well. Like, you can't just win it having a great quarterback, a great receiver, and a great running back, right? It's got to be like a whole multitude of guys working together for a common goal. And I think that's where, again, all these guys, or these teams, I should say, really are really separating themselves, right? The Chiefs are playing like more of a team than ever before. The Bills, same thing. The Eagles have the most talented team out of anybody left, and the Commanders are all, chipping in, but really it's Jayden Daniels that's making them play a lot better, but still in a team aspect sort of way. So the ball security, I think, is really the root of everything like that. And like I said, going into this weekend's games, it's going to be fascinating to see how they maneuver around that. Not being too conservative, but also, calculating those risks. And it's just something I noticed over the weekend, and how really the standard is so high right now. It's great to see, honestly. But we did talk about mostly all the winners from this past weekend, but we also got to talk about the losers on the other side. And we're going to rank them. We're going to rank the quarterbacks of these losing teams based on who is most to blame for the losses that these 4 teams unfortunately suffered this past weekend. So we got 4 teams, 4 quarterbacks. We're going to rank them based on who deserves the most blame for getting the elimination this past weekend. So we'll be right back with that. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here on the show now to discuss the other side of the coin, if you will, when it comes to the postseason. We got wins, and we also got to talk about the losses. And with those losses, when we get to this stage of football, all the margins are so thin, everything is so calculated, and everything is so measured that any sort of misstep, any sort of error is always amplified a lot more, and becomes evident a lot of the times in these games where it's back and forth, defenses are getting stops, offenses are responding to each other, but then it just takes one drop or one turnover, or just as a collective not being able to stop something and being able to overcome it in the game as well, or being out of your element and not feeling comfortable and just looking outside of yourself, basically. So much of that is placed on the quarterback in this day and age as well, right? Because they're the highest paid, they're the ones that draw the most eyes, and really, they're the ones that these teams, these offenses build their entire systems around, right? If you're one of those guys. So because the quarterback position is so amplified now, more so than I think even before, even though obviously the responsibilities are the same, but I just feel like nowadays the quarterback is just a lot more important, I feel like now. So there's two outcomes to that, right? Because for all the wins and all the praise that the quarterbacks get, they also face a lot of the criticism in the losses. So we have 4 losing quarterbacks here that we're going to rank them just based on the amount of blame that they should get for these losses. And I think with the losses, it's not just all on them, but we got to talk about, just the fact that they contributed to it, right? And looking at all 4 of these guys, who contributed to a loss more is, being compared to who contributed less. So with that, out there now, we're going to start with number 4. And number 4, I have C.J. Stroud, the quarterback that I felt least contributed to the loss on Saturday when they played the Chiefs. I gave him like a score of 3 out of 10. I felt like CJ outperformed when I really thought about it in this context, right? I thought that CJ outperformed any expectations that I had for him because of, a second year that didn't go as planned. Obviously, after last year, you thought that they'd take another step, maybe make it further this year in the playoffs, especially with Diggs coming in and Mixon and Nico Collins, Danielle Hunter all coming in. You thought that this team was ready to take that next step, and I really thought so too. But with the injuries and the offensive line that really showed no progression from last year heading into this year, that made it pretty lackluster and pretty disappointing. But with that being said, for the Texans to get this far and for the kind of performance that CJ threw out there on Saturday in Arrowhead of all places against the reigning Super Bowl champions, I thought he really deserved the least amount of blame out of any of these quarterbacks because he made a lot of great throws. I thought he made a lot of good decisions with the football, when to keep it, when to throw it, when to escape the pocket and make, those extracurricular plays. I thought he made all the right choices, and unfortunately for me, it was just all about the offensive line, unfortunately. While CJ made as many plays as he could, you can only make so many, and George Karlaftis got to him 3 times. Total, the Chiefs sacked him 8 times as well. So it was unfortunate to see, CJ trying his best, but just the protection just wasn't there against the Chiefs. So that is something that they're going to have to improve a lot this offseason. But for the silver lining in all of this, I thought CJ, to kind of regroup everything of this season and play his best ball in this game, that's encouraging, at least going forward. It's not like he took a major step back or anything like that. I just felt like they ran into a couple more hurdles this year, and they didn't catch a lot of people by surprise. So, all in all, I thought CJ was one of the ones that really didn't contribute that much overall to a loss this divisional round, and that brings us to number 3 on this list. The second quarterback that doesn't deserve as much blame is Matthew Stafford for me. I gave him a 5 out of 10 on the scale because, much like CJ, I thought the offense was working pretty efficiently versus a very good defense in Philadelphia on the road for the most part. That game was pretty close throughout the entirety of the game, and it never felt like the Rams were really out of it. Yeah, the Eagles might have scored first, and yeah, the Eagles might have had a lead multiple times in the game for maybe an extended period, but still, it felt like because you had Stafford, because you had this offense, that you were still in this game. And I was a bit disappointed with how the weather altered their performance, right? I wish that wasn't so evident in the play of Stafford and really this offense, because we saw Kyron fumble. We saw them just look very lethargic and just very sloppy out there when the weather got a lot more severe, I guess you could say. And with that came the turnovers, right? And unfortunately, Matthew Stafford fumbled the ball when they already had fumbled the ball, and they only held them to 3 points. Then they go back and they fumble the ball again. So I thought that was a big mistake by the Rams, of course, unintentionally, but it still contributed to it, right? If you gave up one turnover, fine, all right, that's okay, but then you give up another one at that stage of the game, I thought that was pretty big. So Matthew Stafford, despite all the good that he did in this game, I gave him a 5 out of 10 because also their run defense was okay at some points, but you still gave up those long touchdowns to Saquon and also to Jalen Hurts. So I felt like that could have been better as well. But Matthew Stafford not really getting too much of the blame from me for this sort of loss. And number 2 on my list, I got Lamar Jackson. I got Lamar Jackson as the second quarterback that holds, the second most amount of blame in this divisional round for the elimination of their team. And I gave him a 7 out of 10 because even though he played great at the end of that game to get back into a spot where they really could have won the game or at least tied it, it's hard to ignore the 2 turnovers, right? Obviously. And again, having those 2 turnovers is huge, and I can't ignore them, right? Because one of them led directly to a touchdown for the Bills. So this was only a 2-point game. You take away 7 points for the Bills. Obviously, you can do the math. So that was obviously huge, and that was a big swing point, I felt like. And really, it's more of a credit to the Ravens for being able to overcome that. But still, I can't just see past it despite the fact of how close the game was in the end. And the first half overall also wasn't very good for this offense. They only put up 10 points, and they were down 21-10 in that first half as well. And a majority of that falls on Lamar as well. So that was the negative side of it, but you also can't ignore the fact that they were in a position to win, and Mark Andrews fumbles the ball at midfield. And also, he has a 2-point conversion, and he just simply drops it. And yes, it's tough, and it's like he's going to get so much criticism for that. And I guess I won't say rightly so, because, he probably feels terrible about it and things like that, but he quite literally dropped the ball. And it's unfortunate because he's one of the most trusted guys. He's one of the most trusted guys by Lamar. And the loss, again, unfairly or not, is going to end up hurting Lamar Jackson a lot more because of legacy and his talent and winning multiple MVPs, but the success not being there in the playoffs, right, is a big impact. It has a big impact on his legacy. So yes, Mark Andrews made a lot of, contributions to this loss, obviously, but Lamar also holds a pretty good chunk of the blame in this one as well. But just not as much as Jared Goff. I thought Jared Goff, to me, in terms of blame for losing in the divisional round, I gave him an 8 out of 10 because nothing really went well for this offense. And there was a lot of turnovers, obviously, in this game. And Yeah, I mean, like, he had four of them. Like, four of the turnovers were from Jared Goff. He had that fumble in that first half. He had the pick six. He had another interception in the first half, and then another one as well to end the game. So you had five total turnovers, and one of them, or excuse me, four of them were on you. So that's always going to be tough to overcome, and they just dug themselves in too deep of a hole, I thought, with those turnovers specifically, to really come out of it and come back from this game. It was just too much, right? They hurt themselves too much to really be competitive. Unfortunately, at home against a 6 seed, right, that you felt the Lions were capable of defeating that day. But some of the blame also gets amplified a little bit more from me because, Jared Goff was having a great year so far this year, or really at one point this year where he had that crazy completion percentage run where he was completing almost all of his passes, and he was on a crazy, historical streak at one point in this year. He was part of the leading scoring offense in the NFL. He got them to 15 wins as well, and I just feel like they needed to come out more engaged, and we needed to see that right from the get-go, and I thought they were too slow getting into this game, and then by the time they did, they were already losing, so I never really felt like they had a true opportunity to make a comeback at this thing, especially with all those turnovers. And the defense didn't play, lights out or anything like that. They couldn't stop anything in regards to the Commanders. But they were dealing with a lot of injuries and things like that. And it's not an excuse, but it's just a fact that they didn't have all their players. But really, their offense didn't complement their defense enough, and certainly their defense didn't complement their offense enough. So based on all of that and the fact that Jared Goff, did throw or commit four of those turnovers, it's hard to look past that as really having anybody else have more blame on this loss than him. So again, it is unfortunate to say, but it is major talking points, especially when we talk about the four teams that won in the previous segment and how they played up to a standard that they didn't make a mistake. They didn't hurt themselves. And, highlighting these quarterbacks in this segment now is not so much just to criticize them, but just to amplify that point more, that making one turnover, and especially making four or three or something like that, is just not going to get you far in these playoffs. It's just not. And it's a high standard, obviously, but it is what it feels like the NFL is kind of turning to now. So that's really the point behind that segment overall. But we got a couple more to get to on today's show. One of them is in regards to Jayden Daniels. His historical first year in the NFL continues to go until the NFC Championship at least. So is this the best rookie season ever that we witnessed in the NFL's history? Or could it be the best season just in general that most of us my age or younger have seen so far? I think it's a valid question, and I'm going to explain myself and why I think it's already the best rookie season ever when we return after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
We're back here on the show now to talk about the rookie sensation, the quarterback that's sweeping everybody off their feet in Washington. That is Jayden Daniels. And speaking about Washington, I think it's important to talk about where they were about a year ago now, almost exactly a year ago, where they were well into their offseason already because they were miles off reaching the postseason, right? They were like 4-13. They suffered another miserable season, looking for ways to only just get better, right? Because once you finish 4-13, all you really want to do is just play better and you don't want to see the exact same thing repeat itself. So a year ago, that was their mission, just get better, right? And they brought in a new head coach in Dan Quinn. They brought in a new general manager in Adam Peters, and still with a pretty new owner in Josh Harris. They brought in a lot of new faces to this roster as well, right, on the defense and offensive side of the ball, which included the number 2 overall pick in last year's draft being Jayden Daniels, the Heisman-winning quarterback out of LSU. And now, after all of that and nobody thinking they would ever get to this point, a year removed from all these things happening in their organization, now they're 1 win away from making the Super Bowl after finishing 4-13 the previous year. Outstanding stuff from Washington and Jayden Daniels. CJ Stroud, last year during his rookie year, everybody looked at that as potentially being the best rookie season in NFL history by a good amount of people. But what we've seen from Jayden Daniels this year, going into the number 1 seed's house, I think just on its own and winning, I think that already holds a lot of merit. And CJ Stroud had the opportunity to do that last year, but his Texans team unfortunately fell short of that mark. And Jayden Daniels, it's not like he just kind of was on the ride along for this journey. He's very much been driving the bus through Tampa Bay and defeating the Buccaneers, putting his team in positions to win. He was very much one of the major reasons, if not the main reason, why they beat Detroit this past weekend as well, right? It's not like he's just going along for the ride. He's really affecting where they go on this journey, and that's remarkable to see. But beyond one very important game, obviously this past weekend, looking back on the season that he had, it's been remarkable as well. He broke the rookie regular season record for completion percentage at 69%. He also broke the rookie record for the amount of passing yards at 891 as well. Was the only wild card team, now shifting to the playoffs, he was the only wild card team to win and move on from a lower seed going on the road twice and winning. No other team did that this year other than the rookie, defeating 2 road playoff teams. And also, more postseason notoriety here. Jayden Daniels also became the first player since the 1970 merger with at least 250 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns, and no interceptions in each of his first 2 career playoff games. And with a win, potentially on Sunday, he'd become the first rookie quarterback ever to start a Super Bowl as well. So it's not just doing it in the regular season, finishing 12-5. You didn't win your division, and just making the playoffs, I think, would have been enough, more than enough, for a Commanders team that, again, only just wanted to improve from being 4-13. But now to be 1 win away from the playoffs is an insane thing to even conceptualize at this point in the year. And he's quarterbacking a team to an NFC title game, for the first time in over 30 seasons that they haven't been here. And it only took, obviously, drafting him and getting some good pieces around him and good coaching, and the relationship that he has with Cliff Kingsbury is obviously important, but it's really all about Jayden. And I don't think a lot of people wouldn't say that either. The way that just his uncanny ability of having nothing really rattle him, right? Like, sometimes you could look at some quarterbacks, some players, and you can kind of tell that they're nervous or they know kind of like the magnitude of what's about to happen. But with Jayden, I swear he has like the same exact facial expression anytime I see him. He's either always smiling or he's just like blank, and it feels like he's not thinking about anything, and he's just going out there and playing. And it shows, right? It shows in some of the throws that he makes. The decision-making on its own is almost second to none, because every time like he makes a throw or makes a decision to run it and things like that, go for it, keep it on an RPO or something like that, it always ends up being the best decision, and all the throws that he makes always seem to be the correct ones, and nothing can go wrong for this guy. And I don't think it's luck when you've defeated the number 3 seed, You went on the road to the number 1 seed's house and defeated them. Now you have an opportunity to beat the number 2 seed in Philadelphia, of all places, as well. So I already said it's the best rookie season ever. I think that's pretty much a given. That's something that a lot of people can agree on, but not to kind of give a hyperbole or anything like that here. But if he goes on to make the Super Bowl and beats the top 3 seeds all on the road on his way there, I think this could be in contention for maybe like the best season I've ever seen. Maybe. Definitely if he wins the Super Bowl. I think that's like in betting terms, like plus like 10,000 or something like that. That's kind of like the odds on that. If he wins the Super Bowl, then like all reasonable conversations and logical conversations regarding Jayden Daniels go out the window, but that's still very much a ways away. But even if, I think just making the Super Bowl, and in that context, right, going to Tampa, going to Detroit, going to Philadelphia, and defeating all those teams on the way there with, again, a very average roster, you have to start like putting him in some very, very elite company if all of that was to happen, right? And the optimal word, obviously, here is if, right? But that's the kind of magnitude we're talking about, right? That's kind of what I was alluding to when I mentioned the Buccaneers and Commanders game, right? Like, a lot of people were on the Buccaneers, and rightly so. The number 3 overall team, they finished the season off strong, but it's always that, but they got Jayden Daniels, or they got Tom Brady, or they got Patrick, or they got Josh. It felt like that was what we were on the verge of in that moment. It felt like Jayden had that thing about him that maybe his team's not as good. Maybe they don't got as many weapons, or their offensive line isn't that great, but they still got Jayden. And he felt like one of those quarterbacks for whatever reason. You know, I just felt like he had that thing about him. And I'm not saying I was the first one to think that. I'm sure a lot of people did. But, you know, it's that kind of thing that's holding you back from picking against him, right? And it happens a lot of times that eventually you get to a spot like with Patrick now, and I don't care how bad his team is. I don't care what seed he's in. I don't care if they're injured. I don't care who his head coach is. If he's playing in a postseason game, I'm going with him because he's done it so many times. And Jayden's still early in this process, but I think having this sort of rookie season, I think that's already been cemented as the best rookie season, and he still has a lot more to potentially do, which is the exciting part. And this conversation was brought up also about who's the best quarterback playing right now based on the last 2 weeks. Which quarterback out of the remaining group has played the best? And I didn't want to say Jayden because it felt like the spontaneous thing to say, right? A lot of people would just say, oh yeah, it's Jayden, right? Because, you know, he played a great game against the Lions, right? And while it was impressive, I just feel like I'm going with Jayden, not for that reason, but just really the fact that he's managing the game as well as I think any of the other quarterbacks with Patrick and Josh, and how they manage the game so beautifully. And the same thing with Hurts, right? Just conservative, no risks and anything like that, running the ball with Saquon. And I think they're all doing a phenomenal job, but Jayden's also managing the game very well. They have a lot of trust in him to make the right decisions, I'm sure, to audible to some plays that he feels comfortable with, or, just making all the right choices out there, giving him a play, seeing where his thoughts are, and they're very comfortable with what he decides to do. And I think all the quarterbacks playing right now have that freedom within their own offenses to do that. But the main difference around Jayden, and why I think he is playing the best out of all the quarterbacks right now, is just the people around him, right? The players around him. You can't say that he has as good of a defense as the Chiefs do. He doesn't have Steve Spagnuolo over there coaching the defense. The special teams aren't as good as the Chiefs are. They don't got a Hall of Fame tight end, really, the magnitude of Travis Kelce. And, you look at Philadelphia, they don't have a skill position player like Saquon at all. They don't have the offensive line like the Eagles have either, and their defense isn't as good as theirs either. The closest you could say is Buffalo, but even they got guys like Von Miller, like Matt Milano. I mean, the Commanders have Bobby Wagner, but even them, they're pretty close now that I'm thinking about it. The Bills and then the Commanders are a lot closer, but I think even still a lot of people would give the edge to the Bills roster, and I think that even more just strengthens Jayden's case for being the quarterback that's playing the best right now. He's doing as much as these other guys are doing with less in terms of talent and things like that. So maybe they're playing lesser competition. Maybe the Lions defense wasn't as good or healthy, or the Buccaneers, again, defensively, maybe not the toughest competition, but it doesn't mitigate really the argument. I think what he's still doing is eons away from what we expect rookie quarterbacks to do. So we could be on the verge of seeing something special, and I hope we are, because I think it would add a lot to these playoffs, right? And that, the standard that we talked about before in terms of playing perfect football. But we'll see. We'll see what happens on Sunday when they face the Eagles for the third time this season. But for right now, we got one more segment to get to, and we're going to end it talking about some overreactions from the divisional round of the playoffs in regards to, again, these 4 teams that we have playing in the conference title games this upcoming weekend. So just some overreactions here to end the show today once we return after this. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show, and I thought it'd be cool just to end it with some overreactions here from the divisional round. Just some overly illogical thoughts that have run through our minds from watching, the playoff round this past weekend, and just seeing how accurate we are with some of these statements. And I don't think these are too outlandish to say, but there are definitely some overreactions that I think could spark some good conversation here. Just some thoughts for you guys to end this show. So the first thing that ran through my mind this past weekend when I was watching the Chiefs was that they don't need Patrick Mahomes to play great in order for them to win a Super Bowl, win their third Super Bowl, right? To three-peat, in other words. They don't need Patrick Mahomes to play great. And I say that because all throughout this year, we haven't seen them to the level, with Tyreek Hill there, with Travis Kelce averaging, that streak of 1,000 yards each season, and Patrick Mahomes throwing for like 50 touchdowns or anything like that. We haven't seen that sort of level from them. He actually had the lowest passing yards of his career this year. He also had tied for the lowest touchdowns he's ever thrown in his career this year, the second lowest QBR of his career, and the lowest yards by a leading receiver happened this year as well, obviously, in relation to his passing yards, right? So he's had all of that happen this year, or I should say the Chiefs have had that happen this year, and still they won 15 games. Still they were the number 1 seed, and still they're winning these games in just a different fashion than I guess we're accustomed to. But with all those other stats, going the other way, his completion percentage is the highest it's ever been this season. all while his number one receiver was injured in Rashee Rice, and they won most of their games with Rice injured, Hollywood Brown injured, Isaiah Pacheco injured. You'd think he'd need to have crazy numbers, right, with injuries like that to kind of compensate and do a lot more with maybe less on his team now, right? Kind of like Joe Burrow, right? When they needed these games where the defense wasn't playing very well, he overcompensated with it by playing out of his mind. But the Chiefs' defense is playing exceptional. They keep the ball better. They keep the ball better than anybody else in the NFL, and they just understand how to win these games. They'll do enough, and they'll do enough just to win these games, right? They've been in a lot of these games a lot of times already, and they understand that you don't necessarily need to put up like 30 points if it's not required to. Against some teams, against some matchups, like the Texans, they've already played before, like the Bills, they've already played before, like the Ravens, they've already played before. They understand what it's going to take to beat these kind of teams, right? They always do it, it feels like, and they just do what's required, right? It almost feels like they go back into their files, they look at, all right, what do we need to beat the Ravens? We're going to do this, this, and this, and they don't care if they win by like 2 points, 3 points. All they care about is just winning now, because at the end of the day, no one's going to remember if they beat one team by 1 point or if they blow out another team. It's all the same, and the biggest thing is just winning a Super Bowl, and I think they understand that now and have almost perfected it in a way that they don't need Patrick to play at an MVP sort of level to win these games. I think they've reached that sort of pinnacle of just team excellence in a way, and I don't think that's too crazy to say. So that's my first thought on the Chiefs, right? After what I saw this past weekend, like, just the thought of the Chiefs almost makes other teams play worse for whatever reason. And I think they just benefit a lot off of that. So they don't really need to do too much, or Patrick doesn't, I should say. So that's my first thought. My second thought is regarding the Washington Commanders, and they could win a Super Bowl this year with Jayden Daniels. I'm fully convinced of it. You'd have to really convince me to not think that Jayden can go into Philadelphia and beat the Eagles. I think he's capable of it right now, but as we go along this week, maybe I change my mind when it comes to the picks. But for right now, I think from what I've seen from them and what he's been able to do and how much he's been able to improve them, I think they could win the Super Bowl this year. And I know I just finished talking about the Chiefs, right? And how they're just serial winners. But the Commanders, I know I can't doubt Jayden Daniels, I think, that much anymore. And it seems kind of exaggerated already, because it's still his first year, obviously, but they've already made it further than all these expectations, considering it's only year one. Like I said, he broke the rushing record, the completion rookie records in the regular season. He brought Washington, again, to this NFC title game already for the first time since the last century, basically. And he has more postseason wins this year than negative plays. He's only punted one time. He's only been sacked one time in each of the last 2 games. And it's not like those are individual stats, really. The punting and the sacks, that's a credit to their offensive line as well, and their overall offense too, right? But I think he has played a huge role in that. It's not just solely him, but a lot of it is based off of his skill set and just how he operates in this offense. And, the roster around him is decent at best. And for him to carry them all the way to this point, again, exceeding expectations, why can't he beat the Eagles? He's already done it once, and I know Jalen Hurts didn't finish that game, but it's not like they just scathed on by. Jayden threw for 5 touchdowns, and it's not like that defense got injured that much either. I don't even think they got injured. And he threw 5 touchdowns on them, and it was still a close game. So it's going to be tough in Philadelphia and everything like that, right? I'm sure a lot of people won't pick them, but it's that thing you just keep stumbling on, right? I feel like Jayden has it, and I always feel foolish now when I picked against them. I picked the Lions to win, and they got blown out, sort of, by the Commanders, right? They beat them by 14 points. So I'm on the fence of it right now, and I'm leaning towards more jumping on the bandwagon for the Commanders and really Jayden Daniels. I think he's starting to prove a lot of people wrong. And, I mean, it's exciting, but I think they could win the Super Bowl this year, or at least I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I really wouldn't. Not anymore, at least. So that is my second statement. And moving on to the third one regarding the Commanders' opponents in the Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts needs to outplay Jayden Daniels for them to get a win. And I think this is an overreaction, one that I won't agree with in comparison to the last two, because I'm very much on the side that Jalen is doing what is required of him right now in his job, in his profession, right? Other times where they made the Super Bowl, right, when they made the Super Bowl, it was required for him to do a lot more. He put a lot more impressive statistical numbers and things like that because he needed to. Now when you have a generational type of guy like Saquon Barkley, obviously, the way this team is operating and the way this team's molded, it's really highlighting the offensive line and that run game. And I just don't feel like he needs to play better than Jayden Daniels because they're not being asked to do the same thing. Jalen has a lot more, I guess, leeway with a better defense, with a better offensive line, with a guy like Saquon, a guy like A.J. Brown, and the rest of his team around him. And it's not like I'm taking away from what Jalen does. They're just required to do different things. I think that the Eagles play with a more of a risk aversion than the Commanders do. I feel like they'll just, with Jayden Daniels, they'll just be all right with whatever he decides. Whereas with the Eagles, they try to kind of push Jalen in a direction where he's not forced to make some of these risky throws. Whereas the Commanders are just like, you know what, Jayden, like you go out there. If it's risky, we trust you, basically, right? And I think they're just being asked to do different things. And I don't think Jalen needs to outplay Jayden Daniels. I just feel like he needs to continue to do what he's been doing. You know, make a couple throws, make sure the run game is operating on all cylinders, and they're going to continue to win games. I don't think he needs to have more passing yards or more passing touchdowns than Jayden to win this game. If anything, that might make it a little bit worse because they haven't really been doing that. So you don't want to change your whole approach to it now. So I think this is one that I wouldn't agree with, but I think it's one that I'm seeing a lot in just social media and just media in general. And the last thing I will say as an overreaction, potentially, is regarding the Buffalo Bills and that this is their best chance to defeat the Chiefs and get to a Super Bowl. And I think I will say it's their best chance up until now, just because I can't, obviously predict the future and things like that. But I feel like, yes, this is their best chance. This is definitely the most confident I've felt in the Bills' defeat, regardless of where they played. If this was in Buffalo, I'd feel even more confident. But the fact that it's in Kansas City, I'm like it's not ideal. But even still, I think the Bills can go in there and beat them, basically. The Bills have faced them before with bigger names like Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and all these guys, and they've come up short, with Josh Allen being asked to basically outperform Patrick Mahomes a little bit, right, in the past. Now, they may not have the same recognizable names, but the variety and the different skill sets that they have and the unpredictability that this offense brings, I think makes them more complete and more dangerous. And they're so similar to Kansas City, right? We just talked about them in the previous segments, how the time of possession is huge for them. They have multiple runners that they could go to. The quarterback doesn't need to play crazy to win this game, and they're playing a lot more methodically and precise rather than explosive and spontaneous and, fast-paced. Now they're much more experienced. Now they're more seasoned, if you will, right? They just know what they need to do, and they don't need to overdo it, basically. They have a good understanding of that now, and the lack of turnovers obviously has been huge for them. That adds to the time of possession and controlling the pace of the game, and that's why I think it's their best chance, because I don't see them getting in their own way anymore, and I feel like a lot of the times they just have the way and the outcome of the game in their own hands, basically. And I trust that now about them. Whereas before, if the game was in their hands or if the game was in in their defense's hands, I would think that it's a wrap. But now I feel like they've really turned a corner, and now they're playing the best I've probably ever seen them, just operating like a well-oiled machine, and clearly the closest thing to the Chiefs. That's why they're playing in the AFC Championship game. So it's going to add a lot to it with mirror images of these two teams playing against each other. But yeah, I mean, those are all the statements I had. Overreactions or not, I'll let you guys decide and let you guys opinionate on my thoughts on those statements. But that is going to conclude our show today. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. And just a reminder to please like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to see more of the Chip Shot Football podcast, check out the YouTube channels on GSMC Sports Network and the GSMC Podcast Network channel to see more coverage around the NFL, more breaking news, off-season news now that we're getting into that period, reactions to all these games, and just breaking everything down each and every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. With me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, signing off right now, but I expect to see you guys all back here again with me tomorrow.
Let's
go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.